Claire left me, my son said as the rain poured behind him, but the moment I looked into my granddaughter's face, I knew something was terribly wrong. Daniel Whitmore stood on my front porch just after 2 in the morning, water dripping from the shoulders of his dark coat onto the welcome mat I'd kept outside my little Ohio home for nearly 15 years. His breathing seemed steady for a man whose wife had supposedly vanished less than an hour earlier. Too steady. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was Lily. My 6-year-old granddaughter clung to my robe so tightly her tiny fingers trembled against the fabric. Mommy didn't say goodbye, she whispered before Daniel could speak again. Those 4 words settled deep into my chest like cold stones. Claire adored that little girl. She never even went to the grocery store without kissing the top of Lily's head first. I stepped aside and let them in without another question. The old grandfather clock in my hallway ticked loudly as Daniel walked past me carrying Lily's pink backpack. The smell of rain followed him into the house. "We had an argument," he said flatly while I locked the door behind us. Claire overreacted and took off. I stared at him. At midnight? In a storm. He rubbed one hand over his jaw and sighed like an exhausted businessman explaining a scheduling problem. "You know how emotional she gets." Emotional. I hated that word the moment it left his mouth. Claire wasn't emotional. She was patient. Soft-spoken. The kind of young woman who apologized when someone bumped into her shopping cart at Walmart. I led Lily toward the kitchen and warmed up a mug of milk in the microwave while Daniel stood near the sink checking his phone every few seconds. Not calling Claire. Not texting her. Just staring at the screen. Lily sat quietly at the table wrapped in my old knitted blanket. Her blonde curls were damp from the rain, and mascara stains marked the sleeve of her little pink jacket where she'd clearly been crying earlier. "Did Mommy pack clothes?" I asked gently. Daniel looked up too quickly. "What? If Claire left, did she take clothes? Her purse?" He shrugged. "I didn't check." The microwave beeped. Lily flinched at the sound. That tiny reaction twisted something inside me. Children notice fear long before adults admit it exists. I handed her the warm milk and sat beside her while Daniel paced slowly across my kitchen floor. Outside, thunder rolled over the neighborhood. Dad was yelling, Lily whispered into the mug. Daniel stopped pacing immediately. "Lily," he warned sharply. She lowered her eyes at once. My stomach tightened. Daniel softened his voice a second later, almost too carefully. "Sweetheart, Mommy and Daddy just had a disagreement." I watched him closely then. The controlled breathing. The measured tone. The strange calmness sitting behind his eyes. It didn't feel like panic. It felt rehearsed. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "There's no reason yet," he replied quickly. "Claire does this sometimes. She needs space." But that didn't make sense either. Claire had no family in Ohio except Daniel and Lily. Her sister Emily lived nearly 900 miles away in Arizona. And Claire hated driving at night, especially during storms. I looked toward the front window as rainwater slid down the glass in crooked lines. Something felt off in a way I couldn't explain yet. Like walking into church and realizing the piano had stopped playing mid-song. Daniel finally sat down across from me. "Can Lily stay with you for a few days?" he asked. "Until Claire cools off." "A few days." "Not until we find her. Not until she comes home." The wording stayed with me. Lily suddenly climbed into my lap, pressing her cold cheek against my shoulder. "Grandma," she whispered so quietly I almost missed it, "Mommy was crying." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "She's tired," he muttered. I kissed Lily's forehead and looked over her shoulder toward my son. For the first time in 68 years, Daniel Whitmore looked like a stranger sitting in my kitchen. Around 3 in the morning, after Lily finally fell asleep in my guest room, Daniel prepared to leave. He grabbed his keys from the counter while I followed him to the front door. "Call me if you hear from her," I said. "Of course." But before he stepped outside, I noticed something that made every hair on my arms rise. Mud streaked the side of his jeans near the knees, dark and wet like he'd been kneeling somewhere outside. And caught near the cuff of his jacket was a single long blonde hair that wasn't mine. Daniel saw me looking and brushed it away too fast. "Get some sleep, Mom," he said quietly. Then he disappeared into the storm. I locked the door and stood there listening to the rain hit the roof. Upstairs, Lily cried softly in her sleep. I should have believed my son. A mother is supposed to believe her child. But deep down, a terrible thought had already begun to grow inside me. Claire hadn't left that house willingly. I did not sleep after Daniel left. I sat alone in my kitchen with the lights off, listening to the storm move across the neighborhood while the old coffee maker clicked softly beside me. Every few minutes I looked toward the staircase, half expecting Claire to walk through my front door carrying her purse and apologizing for the chaos. But the hours passed slowly, and the house remained silent except for the rain and the occasional sound of Lily turning in bed upstairs. Around 6 in the morning, I finally stood and walked to the guest room. Lily was curled beneath the blankets clutching the stuffed rabbit Claire had sewn for her 2 birthdays ago. One of the rabbit's ears hung crooked because Claire had never quite learned how to sew straight lines. I remember teasing her about it over Thanksgiving while she laughed so hard she nearly spilled gravy across the table. The memory hit me harder than I expected. Claire had become part of this family so naturally that sometimes I forgot there was a time before her. I quietly closed Lily's bedroom door and reached for my phone. I called Claire 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. By 8 o'clock the storm had passed, leaving the streets wet and gray beneath a cloudy Ohio sky. Daniel texted me instead of calling. "No sign of her yet. Let me know if she contacts you." The message felt cold. Businesslike. I stared at those words for a long moment before placing my phone face down on the counter. Then I made a decision that filled me with guilt before I had even grabbed my coat. I drove to Daniel and Claire's house without telling him. The neighborhood looked strangely normal when I pulled into the driveway. A mail truck rolled slowly past the corner. Someone nearby was mowing wet grass even though the ground was still soaked from the storm. Ordinary life continued while my family quietly unraveled behind closed doors. Claire's flower pot still sat neatly beside the front porch steps. She loved yellow daisies because they reminded her of summer vacations in North Carolina when she was little. I unlocked the front door using the spare key Daniel had given me years ago. The house felt too quiet the moment I stepped inside. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Like a hotel room after someone checks out unexpectedly. Claire's cardigan still hung over the dining room chair. A half-finished grocery list sat on the kitchen counter in her handwriting. Milk. Strawberries. Lily cereal. Normal things. Future things. I walked slowly through the house noticing details Daniel had somehow ignored. Claire's purse rested beside the stairs. Her favorite white sneakers were still by the door. Even her car keys remained inside the ceramic bowl near the hallway mirror. No woman leaves voluntarily in the middle of the night without her purse, shoes, or car. Especially not Claire. My chest tightened as I moved toward the laundry room. That was when I noticed the washing machine running. Daniel hated doing laundry. Claire once joked that he would rather replace every towel in the house than fold one himself. But now the machine churned loudly beside me, long after sunrise. I opened the lid carefully. Bedsheets swirled through cloudy water that smelled strongly of detergent. Too much detergent. Like someone trying too hard to wash something away. I shut the lid quickly and stepped back. My eyes drifted toward the garage door at the end of the hallway. Something about it unsettled me immediately. The concrete floor beneath the door looked damp in strange uneven streaks, and the sharp smell of cleaning chemicals lingered faintly in the air. I stood perfectly still for several seconds. Then my phone rang suddenly in my hand, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped it. Daniel! I answered after the third ring. Mom. His voice sounded calm again. Where are you? I looked around the empty kitchen filled with Claire's unfinished life and felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the weather outside. At home, I lied quietly for the first time in my life. I left Daniel's house 10 minutes later with my heart pounding so hard it made my chest ache beneath my coat. The entire drive home, I kept replaying his voice in my head. Calm. Controlled. Almost annoyed. Not once had he sounded frightened for Claire. Not once had he asked if I thought she might be hurt or lost or stranded somewhere alone in the rain. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Lily was awake and sitting quietly at my kitchen table coloring with crayons from the old cookie tin I kept for visiting grandchildren. She looked up the second I walked through the door. Did Mommy come back? She asked. I forced myself to smile gently as I removed my coat. Not yet, sweetheart. Her little face fell, but she nodded like a child already trying to prepare herself for disappointment. That broke something inside me more than tears would have. I made pancakes for her even though neither of us was hungry. The familiar sound of butter sizzling in the pan filled the silence while cartoons played softly from the living room television. Around 10 that morning, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it to find Susan Parker from across Daniel Street standing there holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Susan had lived in that neighborhood nearly 20 years and noticed everything. She lowered her voice immediately. I heard Claire is missing. I stepped aside to let her in. Susan sat at my kitchen table while Lily watched cartoons in the next room. Daniel called some neighbors this morning asking if anyone saw Claire leave, she said quietly. Did you? Susan hesitated just long enough to make my stomach tighten. Not exactly. She glanced toward the living room before continuing. Last night around 11:30, I heard yelling from their house. I said nothing. Susan folded her hands nervously around the casserole dish. I almost did not mention it because married couples argue sometimes, but it sounded serious. Then I heard something break. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. Did you see Claire? Susan shook her head slowly. No. But I saw Daniel later. Later. Maybe around 1 in the morning. Her voice dropped even lower. He opened the garage door for a few minutes. I remember because the motion light outside my bedroom came on. A cold wave moved through me. What was he doing? I could not tell. Susan frowned slightly. But he was dragging something heavy across the garage floor. At least that is what it sounded like. I stared at her without speaking. Somewhere behind me, cartoon characters laughed loudly from the television while Lily hummed softly to herself. The normal sounds of morning suddenly felt wrong inside that conversation. Susan touched my hand gently. Helen, I hate saying this. Truly. But Claire always seemed nervous lately. I looked down at my untouched coffee. Memories began surfacing one after another. Claire apologizing too quickly during family dinners. Claire checking Daniel's face before answering simple questions. Claire going quiet anytime he entered the room. Things I should have noticed sooner. Things I convinced myself were ordinary marriage problems because the alternative was too painful to consider. My phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel again. This time I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, he said, the police are asking questions now. I need you to tell them Claire was emotional lately. My breath caught. What? Just stressed, he corrected quickly. You know, overwhelmed with Lily and everything. I looked toward my granddaughter sitting cross-legged on the carpet coloring a picture of a yellow house. Daniel, I said carefully, why would the police need to hear that? There was a long pause on the line. Too long. Then his voice turned colder than I had ever heard it before. Because I do not want them getting the wrong idea. After I ended the call with Daniel, I sat motionless at the kitchen table while Susan quietly carried the casserole dish to the counter. My hands felt cold even though the afternoon sunlight had finally begun pushing through. The clouds outside. I kept hearing Daniel's words in my head. I do not want them getting the wrong idea. Not I want Claire safe. Not I am worried about my wife. The wrong idea. Susan eventually squeezed my shoulder and left, promising to keep an eye on the neighborhood if she noticed anything unusual. The moment the front door closed behind her, Lily wandered into the kitchen holding her coloring book against her chest. "Grandma," she asked softly, "can I show you something?" I forced a smile and followed her upstairs to the guest bedroom. She climbed onto the bed and opened the coloring book to a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. "Mommy gave me this last week," she whispered. My chest tightened instantly. It was a small yellow sticky note with Claire's handwriting on it. I recognized the careful loops of her letters immediately. "If you ever feel scared, call Grandma Helen." I stared at those words so long my vision blurred for a moment. Claire had written it before she disappeared. Before the storm. Before Daniel showed up on my porch pretending confusion. "Why did Mommy give you this?" I asked gently. Lily shrugged, twisting the rabbit's crooked ear between her fingers. "Daddy got mad one night." Her voice dropped lower. "Mommy said if she ever could not answer the phone, I should call you." A slow ache spread through my chest. Claire had been preparing for something. Maybe not this exactly, but something. And somehow I had missed every sign. Later that afternoon, while Lily napped on the couch beneath my old quilt, I drove back to Daniel's neighborhood. I told myself I only wanted answers. But deep down I think I already knew what I was afraid to find. Claire and Daniel's house looked untouched from the outside. Clean porch. Trimmed lawn. The kind of quiet suburban home people passed every day without noticing. I parked down the street this time instead of using the driveway. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, my eyes drifted automatically toward the Parker house across the road. Susan's curtains shifted slightly. Watching. Everyone was watching now. I unlocked the front door carefully and stepped back inside the house that still smelled faintly of detergent and Claire's vanilla candles. The silence felt heavier this time. More deliberate somehow. I moved slowly through the living room until I reached the hallway leading to the bedroom Claire and Daniel shared. Their bed was perfectly made. Too perfectly made. Daniel had never cared about things like that. Claire used to laugh because he tossed decorative pillows onto the floor every night. But now every corner of the bedspread sat smooth and untouched like a photograph in a furniture catalogue. My eyes drifted toward Claire's vanity table near the window. Makeup brushes. Perfume bottles. Hair clips. Her wedding ring dish sat there too. Empty. I opened the vanity drawer carefully. Inside were receipts, lotion bottles, and an envelope shoved beneath a stack of old photographs. My pulse quickened as I pulled it free. The envelope was unsealed. Inside was a printed email dated 3 weeks earlier. Claire had written it but never sent it. "Emily, I do not know how much longer I can pretend things are fine. Daniel keeps apologizing after he loses his temper, but Lily notices everything now. I think I need to leave before this gets worse." My knees weakened slightly against the carpet beneath me. I read the words again. Then a third time. Suddenly every strange memory from the past year rearranged itself inside my head like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Claire cancelling family dinners at the last minute. Claire insisting she was tired whenever I invited her out alone. Claire forcing those careful little smiles that never quite reached her eyes anymore. She had been asking for help without speaking directly. And I had not listened. A car door slammed outside. I froze instantly. Through the bedroom window, I saw Daniel pulling into the driveway. I shoved the email back into the envelope so quickly my fingers nearly tore the paper. Every instinct inside me screamed to leave before Daniel reached the front door. I slipped the envelope into my purse just as I heard his footsteps entering the house below. "Mom," he called out casually. Too casually. I forced myself to breathe evenly while stepping into the hallway outside the bedroom. Daniel looked up the staircase the moment he saw me. For one brief second, surprise flashed across his face before disappearing behind that calm expression he had been wearing since Claire vanished. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I gripped the banister tightly. "I came to pick up some clothes for Lily." His eye stayed fixed on mine longer than necessary. "You could have called first." The tension in his voice settled heavily between us. I walked downstairs slowly, forcing myself not to rush. I did not think it mattered. Daniel stood near the kitchen island, still wearing the same dark jacket from the night before. His hair looked damp, as though he had recently showered. The smell of strong coffee filled the room, but beneath it lingered that same sharp chemical scent from the garage. "Any news?" I asked carefully. He shook his head and looked away. "Police are wasting time asking stupid questions." He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a bottle of water. Claire probably just needed attention. The cruelty of that sentence hit me harder than shouting would have. Attention. As if the woman raising his child was some inconvenience disrupting his schedule. I studied him quietly while he twisted the cap off the bottle. My son had always been handsome in that clean-cut all-American way people trusted automatically. Blonde hair. Steady posture. Calm voice. Even as a teenager, teachers used to tell me how polite he was. But standing there now, I realized something deeply unsettling. Daniel had learned very young how to appear harmless. "Mom," he said suddenly. "Why are you staring at me like that?" I blinked quickly and forced myself to move toward the laundry room. "I am tired." He followed me halfway down the hallway. The detectives asked whether Claire ever talked about leaving. I kept my back turned while opening Lily's dresser drawer. "Did she?" he asked again. His tone sharpened slightly this time. I folded one of Lily's sweaters slowly to buy myself a moment. "No," I answered carefully. It was not entirely true anymore. Claire had talked about leaving. Just not to him. Daniel leaned against the doorway watching me pack clothes into a small suitcase. "You know how emotional Claire could get," he said softly. "Sometimes she made things sound worse than they were. Worse than they were." I felt something inside me turn cold at those words. Claire's unsent email sat hidden in my purse only a few feet away. I suddenly wondered how many times she had tried to explain her fear to someone only to be dismissed as emotional. "Did you and Claire argue often?" I asked quietly. Daniel laughed once under his breath. "Every married couple argues." "That is not what I asked." Silence stretched between us. Finally he shrugged. "She got dramatic lately." Dramatic. Emotional. Attention. He kept choosing words that erased her humanity piece by piece. I zipped Lily's suitcase shut and stood slowly. Daniel's eyes drifted briefly toward my purse sitting near the stairs. Something flickered across his face. Suspicion. "Did you go upstairs?" he asked suddenly. My pulse jumped hard enough to make my hands tremble. "Of course," I replied evenly. "Lily's room is upstairs." He studied me for several long seconds. Then his expression softened again into that practiced calmness. "Right." But I could feel the shift instantly. He no longer trusted me completely. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was afraid to be alone with my own son. As I reached the front door with Lily's suitcase in one hand, Daniel spoke quietly behind me. "Mom." I turned back. He stood motionless in the kitchen, one hand resting against the counter. "If the police ask questions," he said carefully, "just remember Claire had been struggling lately." The room suddenly felt smaller. Harder to breathe in. I nodded once without answering and walked outside into the cold afternoon air. But as I reached my car, I realized something that made my stomach twist with dread. Daniel was not trying to find Claire anymore. He was trying to control the story she left behind. That night I locked every door in my house for the first time in years. Not because I lived in a dangerous neighborhood. Not because of strangers. Because my son knew where I kept the spare key beneath the flower pot by the porch. Lily fell asleep early on the couch with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, while an old black and white movie played softly on television. I sat alone at the kitchen table reading Claire's unsent email over and over again until the words blurred together. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I did not recognize. "Mrs. Whitmore," a man asked when I answered. "This is Detective Ryan Keller with the County Sheriff's Office." My heart tightened immediately. "Did you find Claire?" There was a brief pause before he answered. "Not yet. But I would like to ask a few questions if that is all right." 20 minutes later, Detective Keller sat across from me in my small dining room holding a notebook and paper coffee cup. He looked younger than I expected. Maybe early 40s. Tired eyes. Wedding ring. Calm voice. Lily remained asleep in the living room while rain tapped lightly against the windows again outside. "Your son says Claire left voluntarily after an argument," he said carefully. "Do you believe that?" I looked down at my folded hands. For 68 years, protecting Daniel had been instinct. Mothers defend their children even when they should not. But Claire's note to Lily sat hidden inside my sweater pocket like a quiet heartbeat reminding me of the truth. "No," I whispered finally. Detective Keller watched me closely but did not interrupt. I told him about Claire's purse still being at the house. Her shoes. Her car keys. The laundry running. Susan hearing shouting. Daniel insisting Claire was emotional. Each detail sounded even worse once spoken aloud. Keller wrote quietly for several moments. "Did Claire ever mention being afraid of your son?" he asked. The question settled heavily into the room. I thought about all the signs I ignored because they were easier to dismiss than confront. Claire apologizing for things that were not her fault. Claire checking Daniel's mood before speaking. Claire withdrawing from family gatherings little by little until she almost disappeared long before she physically vanished. "I think she tried," I admitted softly. Keller nodded once, as though he had expected that answer. Then his expression shifted slightly. "There is something else," he said. "Traffic cameras. Place Daniel's vehicle near Blackwater Lake around 2:15 the night Claire disappeared." My breath caught painfully. He told me he was home. That is what he told us too. Silence stretched between us while the refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. Blackwater Lake sat about 20 miles outside town, surrounded by thick woods and old fishing docks. Daniel used to go there with his father when he was a boy. Suddenly a memory surfaced so sharply it made my stomach twist. 2 summers earlier, Claire once mentioned hating that lake because it felt isolated and eerie at night. Daniel had laughed at her in front of everyone for being dramatic. Dramatic. Emotional. Sensitive. He had been rewriting her reality for years while the rest of us watched. Detective Keller closed his notebook slowly. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "I need to ask you something difficult." I looked up at him. "Do you think your son is capable of hurting his wife?" The question shattered something inside me because I realized I no longer knew the answer. Before I could respond, a small voice drifted from the living room doorway. "Daddy made Mommy cry." Lily stood there rubbing sleep from her eyes while clutching the stuffed rabbit against her chest. Detective Keller remained completely still. Lily looked at me, not him. "Daddy got really mad," she whispered. My entire body went cold. "When, sweetheart?" I asked carefully. She stared at the floor for a moment. "The night Mommy went away." Then she looked up at me with frightened eyes no child should ever have. "Daddy told me not to talk about it." After Lily spoke, the entire room seemed to fall silent around us. Detective Keller slowly lowered his pen onto the table while I crossed the room and pulled my granddaughter gently into my arms. Her little body felt tense beneath the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You are safe here," I whispered into her hair, though I was no longer sure any of us truly were. Keller knelt carefully in front of her so his voice would not sound frightening. Lily, he said softly, did your mommy go somewhere with your daddy that night? Lily shook her head quickly. No, did you see your mommy leave? Another small shake of her head. Then she pressed her face against my sweater and whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. Daddy told me mommy was sleeping. My stomach twisted hard enough to make me grip the back of the couch for balance. Detective Keller remained calm, but I saw the change in his eyes immediately. He no longer looked like a man investigating a missing persons case. He looked like a man beginning to understand something darker. After Keller left that night, I checked every lock in the house twice before finally sitting beside Lily until she fell asleep again. The old hallway clock read nearly 1 in the morning. Exactly 24 hours since Daniel first appeared on my porch in the rain pretending confusion. 24 hours of lies carefully stacked on top of each other. My phone buzzed suddenly against the coffee table, making me jump. Daniel! I stared at his name glowing on the screen for several seconds before answering. Mom, he said quietly, why were detectives at your house? My mouth went dry instantly. They are investigating Claire's disappearance. Do not play games with me. His voice stayed calm, but something dangerous sat beneath the words now. Keller called asking strange questions about our marriage. I looked toward Lily sleeping beneath the quilt. Maybe because your wife vanished. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Daniel sighed heavily. Claire always made things sound dramatic. You know that. There it was again. Dramatic. As though repeating the word enough times could erase reality itself. Where were you really that night? I asked before I could stop myself. Another silence. Longer this time. What did the police tell you? He asked carefully. My chest tightened. Daniel. Mom. His voice hardened suddenly. You need to stop listening to outsiders who do not understand our marriage. Outsiders. He meant Claire. Her sister. Susan. Even me now. Anyone threatening the version of reality he wanted to control. Did Claire try to leave you? I asked softly. His breathing changed slightly on the line. She was confused lately. That is not what I asked. For the first time since Claire disappeared, Daniel lost control of his carefully measured tone. You always took her side, he snapped. The sudden anger in his voice shocked me silent. Then just as quickly, he calmed himself again. I am sorry, he said flatly. I am exhausted. I closed my eyes briefly. I suddenly remembered Daniel at 16 years old standing in our kitchen after punching a hole through his bedroom wall because a football coach benched him during playoffs. Calm 5 minutes later. Smiling. Apologizing. Convincing everyone he had simply been stressed. Back then I called it teenage temper. Claire probably called it something else. Mom, Daniel said quietly, if Lily starts saying strange things, do not encourage it. She gets confused easily. I felt cold all over. She is 6 years old. Exactly. His voice lowered. Children imagine things. But Lily had not sounded confused. She sounded frightened. After the call ended, I sat alone in the darkness listening to the refrigerator hum softly in the kitchen. Then another memory surfaced without warning. 3 months earlier at a family barbecue, Claire accidentally dropped a glass pitcher onto the patio. Daniel smiled while helping clean the mess, but later I found Claire crying quietly in the bathroom with the door locked. When I asked what happened, she said she was just overwhelmed. I believed her because believing anything else would have meant admitting I raised a man people learn to fear behind closed doors. And now Claire was gone. The next morning, Detective Keller called before sunrise. His voice sounded tighter than before. Mrs. Whitmore, he said carefully, we found Claire's vehicle. I sat upright instantly in bed while Lily still slept curled beside me beneath the quilt. Where? Near Blackwater Lake. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. I pressed one hand against my chest and listened while Keller explained that a park ranger discovered the car parked near an abandoned fishing dock about 2 miles off the main road. Claire's purse was inside. So were her keys. But Claire herself was nowhere near the vehicle. 40 minutes later, I stood beside Detective Keller near the edge of Blackwater Lake while cold wind rolled across the dark water. Police lights flashed silently against the trees farther down the gravel road. The lake looked exactly as Claire once described it. Lonely. Grey. Endless. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself while Keller spoke quietly with another deputy nearby. Daniel had arrived 10 minutes earlier. He stood beside his truck with both hands shoved into his pockets, answering questions with that same calm expression I had come to fear. Every now and then he glanced toward me, not with grief, but with calculation. Like he was trying to determine how much I knew. I looked toward Claire's car park near the dock. Her daughter's pink rain boots still sat in the back seat where she must have forgotten them after school earlier that week. Seeing those tiny boots nearly broke me. Claire had planned to come home that night. She expected another morning with Lily. Another grocery run. Another ordinary Tuesday. Detective Keller eventually approached me holding a small evidence bag. Inside rested a silver bracelet covered with dried mud. My breath caught instantly. Claire wore that bracelet every day. I bought it for her first Mother's Day after Lily was born. A diver found it near the shoreline, Keller said gently. I could not speak. I simply stared at the bracelet while wind rippled across the lake behind us. Somewhere nearby a police radio crackled softly. Daniel suddenly walked toward us before I realized he had moved. Mom, he said sharply, what are you doing here? His eyes flicked toward the bracelet in Keller's hand, and something changed in his face for half a second. Panic. Real panic. Then it disappeared beneath anger. You should be home with Lily, he snapped. Keller stepped slightly between us without making the movement obvious. Mr. Whitmore, we are still processing the scene. Daniel ignored him completely. His attention stayed fixed on me. You have been talking to detectives behind my back, he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. Behind his back. As though Claire's disappearance was some private family disagreement meant to stay hidden inside the walls of their house. Your wife is missing, I replied softly. She is my wife, he corrected immediately. And you are making this worse. The coldness in his voice settled deep into my bones. Suddenly I understood something terrifying. Daniel did not see Claire as a separate person anymore. Not really. He saw her as part of his life. His reputation. His story to control. Detective Keller finally spoke firmly. Mr. Whitmore, I need you to step back. Daniel laughed once beneath his breath and looked toward the lake. Everyone acts like I did something horrible, he muttered. You do not know what she was like lately. There it was again. The careful rewriting of Claire into someone unstable enough to vanish on her own. But standing there beside that dark water, holding the memory of her silver bracelet in front of me, I finally stopped doubting myself. Claire had not disappeared because she was emotional. She disappeared because she had been trying to escape someone dangerous. And that someone was my son. As officers continued searching near the shoreline, Daniel suddenly turned toward me one last time. His voice dropped low enough that only I could hear it. Mom, he said quietly, if you keep pushing this, you are going to destroy our family. I looked at him for a long moment while wind moved across the water behind us. Then I realized something that made my chest ache with grief. Our family had already been destroyed. We just had not admitted it yet. 3 days later, they found Claire. Detective Keller came to my house just after sunset while Lily colored quietly at the dining room table beside me. The moment I opened the front door and saw his face, I already understood. Some truths arrive silently before words ever touch the air. Keller removed his hat slowly and lowered his eyes for half a second. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, I am very sorry. I gripped the edge of the doorway to steady myself. Somewhere behind me, Lily laughed softly at something on television, completely unaware that her world had just changed forever. I do not remember much after that conversation. Only fragments. The sound of rain beginning again outside. The smell of cold coffee sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. The terrible weight settling into my chest as Detective Keller explained that investigators now believed Claire never intended to leave voluntarily that night. Daniel was arrested early the next morning. I watched from my living room window as 2 sheriff vehicles pulled into my driveway just after dawn. Daniel stepped out of the back seat of one cruiser with his hands restrained in front of him, his expression strangely calm despite everything collapsing around him. He had asked to see Lily before questioning continued. Against every instinct inside me, I allowed it. Lily stood frozen beside the staircase clutching her stuffed rabbit while Daniel knelt in front of her. "I love you, Peanut," he whispered carefully. Lily did not answer. She only stared at him with wide, frightened eyes that no child should ever carry. Then Daniel looked up at me. For one brief moment, I saw the little boy I once tucked into bed after thunderstorms. The teenager who used to leave muddy football cleats by my back door. The young man Claire fell in love with before fear slowly entered her smile. "Mom," he said quietly, "please tell her I am not a bad person." My throat tightened so painfully I could barely breathe. Because that was the cruelest part of all. Monsters rarely look like monsters when you love them. Sometimes they look exactly like your child. I could not answer him. 2 deputies escorted Daniel back outside moments later while Lily buried her face against my sweater. I stood there holding her as police lights flashed silently across the wet morning pavement. After the cars disappeared down the street, the house became unbearably quiet. Weeks passed slowly after that. Reporters called constantly at first. Neighbors left casseroles on my porch. Some people avoided looking at me entirely at the grocery store, as though grief itself might be contagious. Through all of it, Lily stayed close beside me. At night she slept curled against my shoulder because she no longer trusted the dark. One afternoon nearly 2 months later, Emily arrived from Arizona carrying a small storage box of Claire's belongings investigators had finally released to the family. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, and Lily's baby drawings folded neatly together. At the very bottom rested a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Claire's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it after Lily fell asleep that evening. Helen, if you are reading this, then something went terribly wrong. I wanted to leave sooner, but I kept hoping Daniel would change. I kept hoping Lily could still have the family she deserved. Please do not blame yourself. You always showed me kindness even when I struggled to admit the truth. Tell Lily every day that her mother loved her more than anything in this world. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried harder than I had cried at my own husband's funeral years earlier. Because Claire had spent so long protecting everyone else that nobody protected her. Spring finally arrived months later. The daisies Claire planted beside the porch began blooming again beneath the Ohio sunlight while Lily played quietly in the yard with sidewalk chalk. Sometimes she still asked questions I could not fully answer. Sometimes she woke from nightmares calling for her mother. But slowly, little by little, laughter returned to the house. Not the same laughter. Never the same. One evening I sat alone on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees while Claire's silver bracelet rested in my palm. I thought about all the moments I ignored because accepting the truth felt impossible. Then I looked toward Lily drawing flowers across the driveway in bright pink chalk and finally understood something I would carry for the rest of my life. A mother's love should protect the innocent. Not protect the guilty.